Hi, everybody. My name's Anna Wilkinson, and I'm Professor of Animal Cognition at the University of Lincoln. So, in my research, I'm interested in how animals learn, how they remember, and how this knowledge alters the decisions that they make. And today, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about that as it relates to pet animals. I'm going to be mostly focusing on my work, but also talking about some other work where it's relevant. So, when we think of intelligent pets, what do we normally think of? Is anyone willing to write in the chat about what pets they think are intelligent? You might have a clue from the PowerPoint. Okay, as nobody's written in or I can't see it, I'm going to go ahead and say that often pet owners think of dogs as being really clever. And there are a number of reasons why. So there are lots of films, there are books about dogs doing amazing things and are solving challenges and helping humans. And we know in real life that dogs are able to do this as well. But the question is, are they actually really much cleverer than other pets? Well, I put into Google search when I was preparing for this PowerPoint the word clever pet, and I got 144 images of dogs before I got an image of any other animal at all. And the 141st image was actually of a cat. Okay, so generally, when we do think of these in popular culture, we think of dogs as being really intelligent. And this is something which has actually been really great for dogs as well, because people often treat them really well because they see them as being intelligent. And but it's also potentially problematic for dogs too, because if people think they're maybe cleverer than they are, you get people say, "Oh, my dog did this. He was being spiteful." Or she was doing this. And actually they're inferring a lot more mental abilities on dogs than maybe they possess. And because of that, it can also be problematic for their animals. So what do we know about dog cognition? Well, dogs have a really unique place in human society. And more than many other pets, they're actually seen as being a member of the family. And as we said, gives them really great opportunities. They get lots of enrichment, they get lots of interaction, and they get to do all sorts of interesting things. But actually, what are the challenges with it? So we know that dogs are really good at using human social information. And so what's social information? Well, that's information which we use in order to communicate. And dogs are very good at using this. So one of the classic tests for dogs' sort of understanding of human gestural cues, so how we move our hands around, are pointing tasks. And in these tasks, what people do is they would point at a certain thing. I'm pointing, but you can't see on the screen. They would point at a certain object, and the question is, will the dog go to that object or potentially a different object? And what you normally find is that dogs do go to the object which is being pointed at. And people have said, oh, okay, so this is really exciting. It means they can actually infer the information from the human point and they understand this gestural information. So that's a really high level attribution of these abilities. But actually, it may be that dogs are doing something much simpler. So through learning, they've learned that actually the end of a hand has good things. We feed with our hand, we do interactions with our hand, we stroke the dogs with our hand. And maybe they've just learned that this is really salient. So when they see us directing that hand to something, they may go to it. And they don't necessarily need to understand that we are actually inferring information as a result of this. And so actually, by using these much simpler potential solutions, dogs are actually able to do really remarkable social cognition tasks, learning from humans and when they're learning from other dogs as well. Now, I would say probably what's the most interesting thing about dogs is that they really attend towards humans. And so they might pick up more information than maybe other species. But actually, a recent review has looked at dog cognition, and they've compared it to other social hunters. They compared them to other domesticated animals and to other carnivores. And actually, they've said on the basis of this that we don't actually think that dogs, their cognition or their intelligence is anything particularly different from what we would expect. However, as we've said, what they are really good at is they're really good at attending to humans. And actually, in some of the work we do, they attend to humans too much. So I do lots of work looking at how to best train detection animals. And of course, if we're going to ask our animal to, say, search for explosives, we want them to use their nose and we want them to ignore the humans. And actually, when we're doing our training with the dogs, a lot of the initial training is actually getting them to ignore the cues that we're giving and to smell the pot, smell the odor that we're giving them. So give them little pots that they have to smell, and then they have to respond appropriately to those. And actually, even though the dog's brain region for sort of odor information is about 40 times larger than we as humans have, because of the experiences they have living with us, they actually like to attend to humans and the visual information, and the speech we give them more than odor. So you have to actually train them to do this. So assuming that sort of intelligence isn't what is unique to dogs, it's maybe not what we say, but actually maybe it's about how they understand what we feel. And maybe that's why we have this very special relationship with dogs. So I want to tell you now about some research which we did a few years ago with dogs, and we were really interested in understanding whether they were able to recognize human emotions and dog emotions as well. So the way which we would look at this is we had our dog sitting at the front, as you can see on this picture, and then we would present them with two faces of either a dog or human, and the faces were either happy or the faces were angry. Okay, so they saw a happy face and an angry face. And then what we did was we played them a vocalization. If we're talking about humans, it would be either a happy speech or angry speech from a human. And then what we did was we watched to see what the dogs did. If they heard an angry speech, would they look at the angry face more? So does this tell us that they recognize that these two are associated together? And that's exactly what we found that they did. So it suggests that dogs are actually able to recognize our human emotion. We then looked to see if they responded differently to the different emotions. And we found that they did. So we looked at lip licking behavior. And this is thought to be sort of an appeasement type behavior in dogs. And we looked to see when they lip licked more. And again, it was when they were looking at the angry face. So it suggests that they not only recognize these emotions, but potentially they might actually be responding to it in a way which could be appropriate. And for me, that's where you see a pretty unique and remarkable response from dogs, which we may not see in other species. And that's potentially why dogs are so successful as pets and living within human society. So now that we've thought about sort of the most intelligent pet that we think of, okay, and we thought, well, they are clever, but they're not super clever. What about pets that we don't normally think of as being intelligent? So I'm sure you will all have heard the expression having a memory like a fish. So there's a well-known expression that there's this well-known idea that fish have a memory of 3 seconds. Okay, that is not the case. So in work which was done quite a while ago now, they actually showed that fish could remember things for at least 3 months. Okay, that's incredibly important. So if you think about these fish that you can see here, kept in a bowl with really not very much they can do, not very much they can go, there's nowhere they can hide, there's nowhere they can escape from the other fish if they want to. Okay, and you think that that animal can remember things for 3 months. This is not potentially the best sort of environment that you'd want to keep a fish in. If you thought they can only remember for 3 seconds, and by the time they've got across half of the bowl, they've forgotten, then it is potentially something that you would think was okay for fish. So actually, by understanding the cognition of animals, it's really important that we then ensure that we keep them in a most appropriate way. Now, there was some research done a few years ago where the researchers showed that actually, if you kept fish in different environments, it actually impacted their brain. So what they did was they kept fish in light environments or in darker environments, and when they were in the lighter environments, actually the visual area of their brain was larger. When they were kept in dark environments, the olfactory or the odor part of their brain was larger. And we were really interested in this because, of course, it's really important when you consider the way you keep your animals. And we wanted to then follow this work up to see whether you actually see differences in behavior as a result of keeping conditions. So what we did was we kept groups of fish in either light environments or in dark environments. And in the dark environment, we actually just use pond dye that you can buy off the shelf and which is recommended for people to put in their ponds if they want them to look darker. So we didn't do any strange manipulation. We just bought something off the shelf which was designed specifically for fish. And we wanted to look at how it impacted the information that they have and that they use. So the way that we did this was that fish like to school. So they like to be with other fish. And so what we did was we put a fish in a tank and it could see lots of fish on one side or not very many fish on the other side. Okay. And when they could see the fish, what we found is that both groups, no matter if they'd lived in the light or in the dark, they would go to the larger shoal. So they would go towards the larger animals, the larger number of animals. Okay. We then did the same with odor information. So they couldn't see the fish, but what they could do is they could smell the fish. So we had this odor of a large number of fish on one side versus the odor of a small number of fish on the other side. And again, we found that both groups, irrelevant of their previous housing experience, went towards the side with larger fish. Okay, so we've shown that even though this other research had shown that there were differences in the brain, we've shown that they can still use both of these pieces of information. And what we then wanted to do was we wanted to put these pieces of information against each other to see whether, if they had a choice, which information they would use. So we had on one side, they could see lots of fish, but only smell a few fish, and on the other side they could only see a few fish but they could smell lots of fish. Okay, so the information was competing with each other. And what we found then was that the fish that had been living in the darker environment, they used the odor information, but the fish which had been living in the lighter environment used the visual information. So by simply following two different ways of caring for fish, and these are using off-the-shelf products, we found that actually we are changing the way these animals use information. So of course this is really important to remember if you think about their captive care, but it's also incredibly important to remember if we think about the environments that these animals are living in and how they're changing. So for example, some streams get a lot more broken down leaf matter in them, and so they are darker. There is less light there. And so that could potentially be altering the fish's behavior. So we then took this a step further to look at how, so we've shown that different keeping conditions alter sort of perception, but how do they alter potentially cognition? So in this experiment, we were interested in snakes. And we wanted to look at whether there were any differences depending on how enriched the snake's environment was. So what enrichment is it's providing different resources to an animal, which they may use, which might allow them to behave more as if they would when they were, if they were in the wild, or their natural behavior. It allows them to express the behaviors they naturally would. So what we had two housing environments. We had a standard one, which you can see at the top here, which had what the animals need. It had heat, it had water, it had a shelter, okay? But that was about it. And this is representing a standard keeping conditions for these animals. In the bottom environment that you can see there, we had an enriched environment where we had lots of hides. The hides were at different heights, and we also had one which was humid versus others which were dry. We had climbing facilities. We had a big water bowl so the animals could actually swim in it. Okay, and then we wanted to look at how that shaped the snake's cognition. So in particular, we were really interested in how it altered their perception of humans. Now, often humans who keep pet reptiles, some are fascinated by them, and that's amazing, but others sort of say that they're quite boring, they don't do very much. And we have this idea that maybe that's because of the way they're being kept. So in this experiment, we looked to see how the different enrichment impacted their ability to discriminate between humans, either humans that they knew, familiar humans, or humans that were unfamiliar. And we did that using scent pads. So what we did was we asked either known humans to hold some little cotton pads to collect their scent in their hand like this, and we asked strangers to do the same. And we were really interested to see whether the snakes would be able to discriminate between those. So basically, could they potentially recognize the odor of a familiar human versus or not? And did the keeping conditions impact this? So the way we tested this was we put a snake in an arena, as you can see in the figure here, and there were two different cotton pads, one with the odor of a familiar human and one with the odor of an unfamiliar human. And what we found that there was no difference in exploration between the two conditions, which is good. So it's not just that the ones in the standard environment were maybe too scared to approach the pads, but the ones in the standard environment approached both pads equally as much. So they didn't show any sort of preference, and they didn't show any ability to discriminate between the humans. Whereas the snakes living in the enriched environments did. And they actually spent much, much more time exploring the unfamiliar human, presumably because it's a novel odor and they were interested in it. So just by looking at different levels of keeping in your animals, so by providing enrichment, actually changes the snake's ability to potentially recognize individuals, or at least display that recognition. And you can see how that would be incredibly important for in caring for the animals. And of course, bringing humans in and getting them to understand the needs of these animals will then promote potentially a much better relationship with them. So now that I've shown you that actually keeping animals in really sort of enriched conditions can impact their intelligence, I want to tell you just a little bit about some of the work which we've done looking at tortoise intelligence. Now, these tortoises all live in really lovely enriched conditions. And so I'm going to talk about what we found and the potential implications of that. The tortoises I'm going to be talking about red-footed tortoises. This is Jeff the tortoise, and these guys come from Central and South America, and they are omnivorous, so they eat all sorts of different things, and they are really food motivated. So they will do almost anything for a little tiny piece of strawberry. So they're really, really good to work in cognition experiments with. And they're also pretty fast moving. And if ever you come and visit my tortoises, you will see that they're very inquisitive and they are interested in everything that comes around them. Okay, so what have we looked at? So one of the things that I was really interested in is long-term memory. Because if you think about the care of animals, actually, and their relationship with you, in order to promote that, we need to understand what they can actually remember, just like we've said with the fish. And the first experiment we were really interested in is whether they could actually learn to use a touchscreen and remember this for several months. So in this experiment, what we had to do was the tortoises had to touch a little red triangle that you can see on the right-hand side. Okay, then they got a choice of two stimuli which look the same, they're blue circles, but they had to learn a specific side. So they had to learn either that the left side was correct and they got food, or that the right side was correct and they got food. And the reason we were interested in this is we were interested to see if they were able to take this learning in this environment and actually generalize this to a real world environment where they learned that a stimulus in the same position was likely to produce food. So this is a little bit like a very simple version of map reading. And so what I will do is I'll show you a video of my tortoises. This is Esme actually using the touchscreen. So what you can see is she has to touch the red triangle, and then her positive side is the left. And so she touched the left blue stimulus, and then just underneath her appears a little piece of strawberry once she gets it correct. So you can see her, yep, as she's done it, you can see as she then dips down and she eats. Okay, so not only can tortoises use touchscreens, we also found that they could generalize this into a real world arena. And we found that they could remember this for over 3 months. And so this tells us they have really quite impressive long-term memory. We then did some work where we explored this further. And we wanted to look at and we wanted to look at how long they could remember. So we trained them in a similar sort of task, but we were interested in colour cues in that point, because we were interested in sort of stimuli associated with, say, fruiting trees and food availability. And colour is a really, really important aspect of that. And so what we then did was we trained them to discriminate between two different colours. And then we looked to see what their preference was. And the different colours had different outcomes. So it could be something really good, like mangoes if you're a tortoise, or it could be something less good, like apple if you're a tortoise. And we found they could associate the different rewards with the different stimuli with the different rewards. And then what we did was we looked to see which they preferred. And of course they preferred mango, which was their favourite, even when mango was quite far away. And then we thought, okay, so this is meant to be representing sort of fruiting trees. So yes, we're showing that they can discriminate between them, and that they will put more effort in to trees further away if they like them more. But actually, one of the key attributes of a seed disperser is that it needs to remember not just there's food this year, but there's potentially food next year as well. So what we did was we gave them what we call a retention interval. And that's basically, we gave them 18 months off where they didn't have to do this sort of work. They did some other work. And then after 18 months, we presented them with the same stimuli. And with the prediction that if they could remember this information, they would go to the stimulus associated with the mangoes over the one associated with the apples. And that's exactly what they did. So we've shown that they can remember for 18 months, which is a really substantial amount of time. And that's not the limit, because we stopped testing them at that point. So the limit could potentially be even longer. Okay. And so it's really important to remember that, because if you think of these animals and the way they're kept, it's really important to know that they will remember bad experiences, but also that they're going to remember good experiences. They can potentially remember aspects of your garden if you put them outside in the sunshine and things like that. And so we need to make sure that the bad experiences are less bad for them, even when they're necessary, like going to the vets. But also we need to promote the positive welfare by giving them opportunities for good experiences as well. Now, the final, we've got, hold on, let's see if we can push this on. Oh dear, my PowerPoint seems to have frozen somehow. Let's have another go. There we go, magic. Okay, so the other aspect of reptile cognition that I want to tell you about is about learning from each other. Now, learning from each other is what we call social learning. So it's learning from the behavior of another individual. And that's something that right at the beginning we said that dogs were good at. And actually, it's something that, about sort of a few decades ago that we thought only primates could do. Now we know, or maybe dogs, because dogs are special, they live in a special environment with us. And we wanted to see whether reptiles were able to do this. Because actually, if they're able to show these sort of really higher levels of cognition, then again, it's going to impact the way that we should keep them. So how do we do this? Well, we had two different conditions. In the first condition that you can see on the left here, okay, we gave the tortoise a V-shaped fence like this. And on the other side of the V, there was a little food bowl filled with lots of their favorite things. Okay, they could see through the fence. It was made of wire mesh, but they couldn't get through the fence. They had to walk around the fence to get to the food. And in the first condition, we call this a control condition, because the animals just got the opportunity to do it on their own. They had to sit in a little cage at the beginning, and then they could walk around until they could access the food. Then we also had an experimental condition. And in this, everything was exactly the same, except while in the little cage, the tortoise saw another tortoise walking around and accessing the food. Now, we wanted to make sure that, for example, they weren't using anything like odor information to solve the task. So we had to, all of this was done on sort of bark, and we would move it around to make sure that they weren't using that information. And then the question was, would this tortoise in the experimental group be better at accessing the food reward than the control individuals? So what I'm going to show you now is a video of the first trial of one of the control tortoises. Okay. I'm afraid the quality of the video is quite dark, but you should be able to see it okay. So we have our tortoise who's in the cage. She's just been released. And you can see she's trying to get to the food, but she can't get through it because of the fence. Okay. And she had 2 minutes to do that. Now, we gave each of the animals 12 trials. So they had 12 attempts to do this. And pretty much that's what we saw the control group doing. And after about 5 trials, they maybe would go up the side, but then they go to sleep in the corner. And not a single control animal was able to complete this task. Okay, so none of them could do it. Then we trained a demonstrator. And the question is, what do the animals who get to see a demonstrator do this task, are they able to do it as well? Okay, so this is a video of the first trial of one of our experimental animals. Oh, no, that's not what we want. Okay, so this is the observer tortoise. The tortoise you can see now is the demonstrator tortoise. She's doing a lovely demonstration. She's then removed, the bark's moved around. And what does this tortoise do? This is his first time in the arena. Oh, and look, he did it. Brilliant. And what we found was that all of the experimental group tortoises were able to complete the task. So we've shown that reptiles are able to learn from each other. And they can even learn from a goal which is otherwise inaccessible by watching the behavior of a conspecific. And this is considered to be potentially very high level cognition. And we've done other work which has looked at how they do it. You know, and they seem to use very sophisticated ways of doing this. So I think what I want you to think about, and I want you to take away from this talk, is that actually pets display their different abilities in different ways. And it's important that just because an animal isn't necessarily much like a human, that we don't then dismiss them and think that they don't need the same level of care. So what are the implications for your pets? Well, I hope we've shown you evidence of complex cognition in a variety of species. And I hope we've shown you that understanding an animal's intelligence will allow us to meet their needs. And it's really important to remember that observing intelligence in species that we might not normally think of as smart has really important implications for the way we care about them. And I just want to leave you with my very favorite quote, which is that the physical sluggishness and awkwardness of the turtle may have earned him an undeserved reputation for stupidity. Thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, I've now worked out how to see the comments in the chat. And so please go ahead and ask. And I see that lots of you said dogs as being intelligent animals, so that's perfect. Okay, lovely. Well, if anyone has any questions that they would like me to answer at a later date, then I will, my email address is awilkinson@lincoln.ac.uk. Please feel free to fire me an email. And if you can't remember my name, I'm pictured, funnily enough, with a tortoise on the website. So please look me up. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that.